Welcome, everybody. This is Jackie Jacob, host for today's webinar. Our speaker is 5 minutes late. Hopefully he'll be here soon. He got mixed up between Eastern and Central Time. If you want to type in the chat box where you are located, that would be helpful just to get an idea of where everybody is. You just got on, our speaker is a little late. We'll start as soon as he gets here. If you could type in the chat box where you are located, that would be very helpful as we're waiting for the speaker to come on. I'm sorry that it had to be rescheduled. Speaker couldn't make it at the last minute, but was willing to reschedule. So nobody wants to tell us where you are. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. Okay, we'll start and then hopefully he will get here in the next few minutes. Q&A just met. Oh, the chat's disabled. That's why nobody's doing it. Everyone can chat. Everyone can chat. Thank you for letting me know. Now you want to tell me where you are? Hopefully everybody can get in now. Wyoming. I don't think we've had anyone from Wyoming in a very long time. Central Massachusetts. That's nice. Okay, if you just arrived here, we are waiting for the speaker to show up. He got confused between Central Time and Eastern Time Zone. He's in the Central Time Zone. So hopefully he'll get on in the next minute or two. Another question. Whoops. Okay, so while we're waiting, if you could type in the chat box where you are located, that would be very useful. See, we even have one from Burkina Faso and one from Ghana. Welcome. Most of the talk will be about United States, but I'm sure the concepts will be very similar regardless of where you are in the country. So let's get started with introductions. My name's Dr. Jackie Jacob. I am one of the poultry specialists here at the University of Kentucky. I have a 100% extension appointment. As part of my extension activities, I work with E-Extension, which has, E-Extension is the online, you should be able to share your screen, Wilmer.
Okay.
And so as part of my work, I do these monthly webinars. They are all recorded. You can go and watch any of the recordings from any past webinars. You can also see which ones are coming up. Next month's webinar, April 1st, is on sprouting grains for poultry diets. If you are interested, this is the page to find things. So for today's presentation, we have Dr. Wilmer Pacheco, is that how you say it? From
Pacheco, yes.
Auburn University, who's going to be talking about poultry nutrition and feeding of poultry. When he is giving his presentation, I will be on mute and turn off my video. so you can concentrate completely on what he's doing. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat or the Q&A box. I will monitor those. And if the question is related to what he's talking about at that time and it's a clarification of something, I will pop in and ask the question. Otherwise, the questions can be held till the end. But if you're like me, if you don't write down your question right away, you forget. So that should do it.
Mhm.
Are you able to get your slides up?
Yes, I can go ahead and share. Yeah,
Yeah,
you can.
okay.
You can.
Okay, so I'll let you give your presentation. I will be on mute with no video. Again, if you have any questions at the time, write them down. We'll be monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Jackie. And it is a pleasure to be here. And basically, the idea of this presentation is one is to just give you like a general overview of nutrition and nutrients, and then I will also explain to you how you can mix your own feed if that's one of the things that you would like to do in your small flock operations. So just to give a little bit of idea about my expertise, I am originally from Honduras. I study food science in the Pan American Agricultural University. And when I was in Honduras, all my focus was on milk processing. However, when I finished my undergraduate degree, I received the opportunity to move to the United States and work with Smithfield Foods. I was in the management program for a year in a feed mill, and then a year later, I was promoted to a night shift supervisor, and I was responsible to oversee the production of around 10,000 tons of pelleted feeds. And this was mainly for swine, and that's how I became familiar with feed processing. And then after, in 2009, I received a scholarship to do my master in poultry science at North Carolina State University. And then in 2011, I received the opportunity to continue with my PhD, and I did my PhD in nutrition and physiology. So that's how I, became more familiar with nutrition and feed processing. Nutrition because I did my degree in nutrition, my PhD, and then processing because I work with the feed mill industry. And since 2015, I have been working as a extension specialist and now associate professor at Auburn University. This is the outline that I'm going to follow for this presentation. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about like a brief history of poultry, and then I'm going to discuss a little bit the different nutrients in a diets, some different feed types, and then I think it's important also that if you buy like feed, it's important to understand the labels. But if you look chickens, they basically originated in Southeast Asia, and they were domesticated around 8,000 years ago. But in reality, chickens were not domesticated for egg production or meat production. They were domesticated because of the aggressiveness of the cocks, and cockfighting was a very popular entertainment at that time. But they also realized that, like in the wild, a female will produce maybe 10, 12 to 14 eggs. But these females were able to produce eggs if they had more nutrients available. in addition, these birds were, they didn't require a lot of space, and then they were very easy to transport. So then later, all these, birds that were domesticated, some of them were moved to the eastern part of Europe. And something that happened here that was very interesting is that the Egyptians learned how to incubate the eggs, because they knew, like, if they incubate the eggs, they will free the time of the mother hen to continue producing more eggs. And then these birds were moved to America. However, there is some beliefs too that some of these birds came through the Pacific Ocean to the Easter Island and then to Chile. But yeah, the main message here is, like, these birds were not selected for meat or egg production, but now with the genetic selection and with good nutrition, we have these genetics that are able to produce a lot of eggs, and they can grow fairly fast. If you look, a commercial broiler, for example, is going to be able to grow up to 100 grams per day. So, and then layers, they can produce more than 300 eggs per year. So if you look the amount of animals that we have right now, we got at any time around 23 billion birds. And this is 3 times more than, like all the other farm animals combined. So when we look feed costs, we need to remember that feed is the single greatest expense. If you look at your operations and you make the calculations, you're going to realize that feed costs could be up to 80% of your total cost. But processing is also a significant cost. And in general, when we are feeding layers, we typically feed mash diets. And when we are feeding broilers, we typically feed pelleted diets. The reason is because when we are feeding broilers, we want to maximize feed intake. So if the birds consume feed faster, then they are going to get to the market weight faster, and then they are also going to have a better feed efficiency. Layers, because they don't consume as much feed as broilers, we typically are good just feeding with a coarse mash with to our layers. These are what I was telling you about, like the rapid growth rates in broilers. This is mainly due to genetic improvements. If you look the genetics from 1957, with that genetic, in 4 months, a bird was able to reach 1.4 kilograms. That will be around 3.5 pounds. But if you look in 2022, they can reach the same weight in 32 days. A lot of this is a genetic improvements. A lot is better nutrition. If you look the improvements in genetic selection in layers, as I was telling you before, in nature, these layers, they could produce around 12 eggs per year. But now we have, some layers that are able to produce more than 300 eggs per year. So a lot of genetic improvement. When we look the nutrients and the nutrition, we need to remember that birds need nutrients to live, grow, produce, and reproduce. So one thing that is important to remember is that when we are feeding the birds, they are going to use some of those nutrients in the feed to maintain a normal body function. It's basically to stay alive. This could be thermoregulation, immune function, etc. And the extra nutrients that they consume, They are gonna use it for growth. This will be like broilers, for example. All those extra nutrients, they are gonna be used for growth. Layers are gonna be using some of those extra nutrients for growth, but then they are gonna be using the nutrients for egg production. And when we look at typical poultry diets, and this will be, not only in the US, but in different regions around the globe. If you look at diets, cereal grains are gonna make the majority. Between 55 and 70% is gonna be cereal grains. Some examples will be corn, sorghum, wheat, barley, etc. Then the next one will be protein sources. The main protein source that we use is soybean meal, but depending on the availability of other proteins can also be used. And then in minor amounts, we are gonna use vitamins, minerals, and I'm gonna discuss, like the different minerals, because we can use some macro minerals, and then another micro minerals and some feed additives too. And the feed that we are providing the birds is going to contain the nutrients that the birds need for bone development, feather development, egg production, and meat accretion. So let's remember that we have 6 nutrients. We have carbohydrates, we have proteins, fats, then we have vitamins, minerals, and water. And what we need to remember here is that all these nutrients are important, and a deficit of one of these nutrients is going to affect the productivity of the bird. The other thing that we need to remember here is that basically carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, they are going to provide calories to the birds. These vitamins and minerals, they are not going to provide calories, but if we have any deficiencies of vitamins or minerals, that's going to affect the metabolism of energy. And then we are going to have some issues in the birds if we have any deficiencies here. And water is one of the forgotten nutrients. However, we need to remember that birds consume typically twice as much water than feed. So we need to make sure that when we are providing the water to the birds, that water has to have the right temperature. Typically, we want that water to be between 18 and 21 Celsius degrees. If you want to transfer that into Fahrenheit, you just multiply 21 times 1.8 plus 32, and then you get the value in Fahrenheit degrees. And also, if we have water that is more than 25 C, birds typically are not going to be willing to consume that water. And if they are not consuming water, they also are not going to consume feed neither. The other thing that we need to consider is the pH of the water too. And in general, it's better if the pH of the water is more like acid, maybe like 5.5 to 6 in pH. If we have like water that comes from wells and has a lot of calcium carbonates, then that pH will tend to be higher. So once that, now what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the different nutrients. The first one that we're going to discuss are carbohydrates. And what we need to remember here is that carbohydrates are a quick source of energy and is the biggest component in poultry diets. And basically, it's important to remember that the main sources of carbohydrates are going to be cereal grains. So here you can see some examples of corn, wheat, and barley. However, these ingredients, especially like wheat, also contains some non-starch polysaccharides. So these are also carbohydrates, but the birds, they don't have the enzymes to break down those more complex carbohydrates. And that's why some companies also use enzymes, exogenous enzymes, to help the animal to break down these carbohydrates so they can get a higher energy from the diets. So you can see here the different ingredients, and then you can see the amount of starch in that ingredient. So if you look corn, for example, corn contains between 70 and 75% of starch. And then sorghum, wheat, and barley, they are going to contain a lesser starch compared to corn. And what you're going to see too is like, because they also contain less starch, they are going to have less metabolizable energy compared to corn. This is another ingredient that we use, wheat meats, and because wheat meat has a lot of is mainly fiber, a lot of non-starch polysaccharides, is going to have like a low energy level. So we use typically wheat meats, or you can use it, let's say, if you are producing diets for layers, for example, because the amount of energy in a diet for layer is much lower compared to a diet for a broiler. So wheat meats, being a bulk ingredient with lower energy, can be used in those diets to lower the energy content. And when you look at a label, you are gonna see the ingredients that provides the majority of carbohydrates. Here, for example, and this is a perfect example, this is a layer diet. And you can see that the main ingredient in that diet is wheat milling, because in the previous slides, I was telling you like those diets are gonna have less energy. So you need ingredients with a lower contribution of energy. The other thing that you need to remember here with these labels is that the ingredients that are first in the label are the ingredients with the highest inclusion. Fats is another one of the nutrients. And what we need to remember with fat is that fats are a more concentrated source of energy, because 1 gram of fat is going to be providing 9 kcals compared to a gram of carbohydrates or protein that only contribute 4 kcals per gram. So, for example, if you are feeding birds and then during the summer, and then you know that they are going to be consuming less feed, a good way to concentrate more the energy will be to use more fat in those diets, just to account for that lower intake. Also, the metabolism of fats generate less heat increment too. So it is a good alternative to avoid issues with heat stress. Also, fats can help to control dust. I remember when I was working with the industry, we will use at least 0.5% fats in the mixer just to prevent dust, and also because we were pelleting. When you add fats in the diet, it also helps with the pelleting process too. This I already mentioned, that we can use fats to increase energy density. Here, the other thing that we need to remember is that fats, some can be saturated and others could be unsaturated. And basically, when the fats are saturated, they are gonna be more like butter at ambient temperature. These are some examples: tallow, lard, poultry fats, and then you have the unsaturated fats, and then they are gonna be liquid at room temperature. Some examples are gonna be corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, etc. And one thing that we need to remember, especially like if you are using fats when you are mixing your feeds, it's important to remember that fats can become rancid or oxidated. So it's a good practice to make sure that the fats that we are using contain antioxidants. And when you look the label, a common antioxidant will be a toxicquin. That's one of them, but we have like so many different antioxidants that can be used. If we go back here to the label, you are gonna see, for example, this label contains, or this feed contains soybean oil. And then once that you look the nutritional or the guarantee analysis, you can see that the minimum amount of fats in that in the feed is 2.5. The other thing that you need to remember here when you look the labels is that when you have a minimum, that tells you that that's an expensive nutrient. So you already know, like just by looking at the label, that crude protein is expensive, crude fat is expensive because you have a minimum. When you look maximum, like crude fiber is a maximum, that this will be an ingredient that is less expensive. So just by looking minimum or maximum, you are going to have an idea of if a nutrient is expensive or cheap. You can see the example here. For example, calcium, for example, has minimum and maximum. Phosphorus is one of the most expensive nutrients, and you are going to have a minimum for phosphorus. Proteins, basically what we need to remember here is that all these ingredients, corn, soybean meal, wheat, all those ingredients have proteins. And then basically when the birds consume the protein is, imagine like a long change of amino acids. And then when these proteins enter, they are broken down into single amino acids or like dipeptides or tripeptides. And then once that they are small enough or they are in an individual, they enter the blood and then they go to like the different tissues. And in the different tissues, these individual amino acids are going to be used for meat accretion. Also, they are going to be used for egg production or for feathering. The feathers contain a lot of methionine and cysteine. So sometimes, let's say, if you see like issues with feathering, that could be like a deficiency of methionine or cysteine. Also, there are other amino acids, and I'm not going to go a lot in the details. The ones that are the branch change amino acids, those are amino acids that are very important too for feather quality. And here, what we need to remember is that the proteins are made up of amino acids. And amino acids, we have two types. We have the essential amino acids, and we have the non-essential amino acids. The essential amino acids, they are essential because the bird cannot synthesize them in enough amount, in enough quantity, or they could become essential because we are using ingredients that don't have enough of those amino acids. So these amino acids that are essential, they must be supplied in the diet. The non-essential, the birds can synthesize them in enough quantity. So these non-essential amino acids typically are not required in the diets. And here I have like this very complex cycle, the methionine cycle, but this cycle helps me to explain the difference between essential and non-essential amino acids. And here what you can see is methionine, for example, is essential, but cysteine is non-essential. And the reason is because if you follow the arrows, you can see that if we have enough methionine, we can use that methionine to form cysteine. But you can see that these reactions here, where you have the B6 vitamin, that's why vitamins are very important too, you can see that these arrows just goes in a one direction. That means that these chemical reactions are not reversible. So that's the reason why, because we can use methionine to produce cysteine, but we cannot use cysteine to produce methionine. And that's basically the difference between essential and non-essential amino acids. So when we look labels, we need to remember that chickens, the amino acid that is the first limiting amino acid is methionine, and the second is lysine. If you are producing swine, lysine is going to be the first limiting amino acids. And the reason why methionine is the first limiting is because chickens have feathers. And I mentioned before that, methionine is very important for, and cysteine is, they are very important for feathering. And you can see here in the label, and the label also tells you that some synthetic amino acids were also used in the label. And something that I didn't explain before is that it is very common that we use some synthetic amino acids, because if we don't use these synthetic amino acids, then we will need to use more soybean meal to fulfill the amino acid requirements of the bird. So we use this free form or synthetic form of amino acids, and then they help to reduce the level of soybean meal, which is very important too, because if we use more soybean meal or higher crude protein, and then the birds don't need that extra protein, then that's going to be excreted. So here you can see the examples in the ingredients and also the guaranteed analysis. And remember, protein is expensive nutrient, so it's going to have a minimum, but also there will be a minimum for methionine and lysine. Then we have the vitamins, and what we need to remember from the vitamins, they are organic compounds that birds need in small amounts. And vitamins are very important for growth, reproduction, etc. And what we need to remember from vitamins is, like, we have two types. We have fat soluble, and then we have water soluble. The fat soluble will be the vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. And you can see that every vitamin has a function. Then you have the water soluble vitamins, and that will be the B complex vitamin, and then vitamin C. We or the birds don't have a specific requirement for vitamin C, but vitamin C can be used when we know that the birds are going to be exposed to heat stress. So, for example, if you know that you are going to be transporting the birds, it's common to use some vitamin C just to help the birds to adapt better to that stress. The fat-soluble vitamins, the thing that you need to remember is that these vitamins can get accumulated. These vitamins, they don't really get accumulated because the excess of water soluble, they are going to be excreted through the kidney. The only vitamin of the B complex that gets stored for a long time is vitamin B12. So fat soluble, we just need to be careful, because if we have an excess of vitamin A, that can create a deficiency of vitamin D, for example. And we need to remember that some vitamins are produced naturally. We can synthesize some vitamin D with, just with the with sunlight. And vitamin C can be naturally produced by the birds. And as I mentioned before, is useful when birds are exposed to stressful conditions. And then we have the minerals. And here the minerals, we have the macro minerals. And here is mainly calcium, phosphorus, and then we have the micro minerals. And these will be copper, iodine, iron, selenium, sodium, etc. Sodium, chlorine, or chlorides, and potassium, they are important to maintain electrolyte balance. So if you are mixing your feeds, the best is to use a vitamin and a mineral premix, because when you are using the vitamin and the mineral premix, then you know that all the vitamins that are needed by the birds and all the minerals, they are in the premix. Then you focus on premixing these vitamins and minerals with your available ingredients, which could be corn, soybean meal, chickpeas, other ingredients that you have available. And here you can see the minerals. You can see this label has a lot of different minerals. So calcium carbonate is gonna supply only calcium. So this calcium carbonate typically contains around 38% calcium. Then you got monocalcium phosphate, dicalcium phosphate. They are gonna be providing calcium and phosphorus. And then you got other ingredients that give you the micro minerals. And again, if you look the label, you are gonna see that there is a guarantee for calcium, phosphorus, sodium, etc. And the most forgotten nutrient that we can overlook is water. And we need to remember that water is important because it's often and carries the feed through the digestive tract. Also helps to carry nutrients and waste products and contributes to the regulation of the temperature. So we need to remember that the birds should have plenty of access to cold and clean drinking water. So something that you need to remember is like if you got a backyard flock, you cannot just leave the water exposed to the sunlight because as I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation, if the water is too hot, then the birds are not gonna consume that water. And we need to especially remember that the birds consume the majority of the water towards the end of the afternoon. So that will be a good time. And this is particularly for layers. We need to make sure that they have cold water and clean water all the time. So important, if you have water container, just make sure that they are clean, filled in twice per day, and have this drinker under the shade, because if these are exposed to the sunlight, this water is gonna get hot really quick. I don't know how many of you are using automatic drinkers, but here the important thing is like if we have any automatic drinkers, is to make sure that they are not dripping, because you are wasting water, but also that's gonna affect the quality of the litter under the drinker. But if you are using drinkers, especially when you have a small chicks, it is a good practice to flush the line, just because assuming a lot is going to stay a lot longer in the drinker line, and that water is going to get hot naturally. This is more like from the additives now, but is very important if you are producing especially layers. There are some pigments that can be used. And then the idea of the pigments is to increase the coloration of the eggs. You can see here, this has a higher coloration. There is a fan from DSM that you can look what is the color of the eggs. And as the color goes up, then as the number goes up, the coloration of the eggs is higher. This depends more like on the market. So for example, in the US, we typically don't pay a lot of attention to the color of the yolk, but there are some markets where they really like high coloration of the yolk. So when we decide to use pigments, that will be based on our preferences, or if we are selling the eggs, on the preferences of the customers. But we need to remember that regardless that the coloration of the egg doesn't affect the quality of the egg. Some people also use pigments just to increase the coloration in the skin of the birds too. And this is, again, is more like driven by the market preferences. And here you can see that the label also includes the pigment, the marigold, which will be these flowers. And basically, what you need to remember is that, let's say if you are really focused on the coloration of the egg, and let's say you have diets that are corn-based, and for a reason you change it to, let's say, sorghum-based or wheat-based, because these ingredients don't have pigments, then we need to be able to compensate by adding a natural or a synthetic pigment in a way that the coloration of the egg or the coloration of the skin doesn't change. There are different feed types, and typically the complete feeds. So if we go like to Tractor Supply and we buy a complete feed, what we need to remember here is that that complete feed contains all the nutrients needed for maintenance, growth, and reproduction. So typically we are feeding complete feeds. We don't need to add any additional ingredients. But there are gonna be, you might decide to have your home mix. And if you decide to have your home mix, because this is a more challenging option, it's essential that you understand the role of all the nutrients. And besides of what I told you of the nutrients in this presentation, is good that you read and understand if you have a deficiency of a nutrient, how does that deficiency can affect your flock. And the other thing that is important is like if we are feeding complete feeds, we need to limit the amount of scraps, kitchen scraps that we provide to the birds, because we use the analogy of, if you have a child and you give the child the dessert first, the child might not eat the meal. And it's the same situation with birds. If you give the scraps first, then they might not be able to consume the complete feed. So now what I'm gonna do is to tell you how you can mix the feed if that's the option that you wanna follow. And the thing that you need to remember here is that when you are mixing feed, there are two operations where you need to pay a lot of attention. One will be the batching, and the batching will be the weighing of the ingredients that you are planning to use for the feed. Likely you are going to be using a scale. That scale could be like a weigh buggy for the major ingredients like corn, soybean meal, etc. And then you're going to be using a small scale for your micro. So the most important thing that we need to remember here is that these scales need to be accurate. And let me just use the pen here just to explain. When you are checking that this scale is weighing accurately, you can use a standard check. The standard check will be something that weighs like 500 grams, for example, or 1 kilogram. And what you do is like you place the weight in the center of the scale, and then you place it in the left corner, and then in each corner of the scale. You put the standard weights, and the idea here is that regardless of where you place the weight, you should get the same value here. Because if you have variations here, it could be that your scale has a load cell that is not working now. So that's a good practice, just to check that the scales are weighing correctly. And then once that you weigh all the ingredients, now what you want is to mix those ingredients in a way that all the nutrients are uniformly distributed. Because if the feed is not mixed properly, then you can have issues with either toxicities or deficiencies in your flock. And what you do normally is that, let's say I have this example of this mixer, but it could be like other type of mixer. So what you need to remember is that if you have your mixer, the first thing that needs to enter the mixer are the major ingredients, the cereals and the protein sources. And then they are, once that these major ingredients are in the mixer, you just start mixing those major ingredients. And then you start adding the minor ingredients. The minor ingredients will be, could be phosphates, calcium carbonate, salt, etc. And lastly, you add your micro ingredients. That will be like the premixes, or if you are using, let's say, an amino acids, you need to add that towards the end. You don't want to add the micros before, because they are going to fall at the bottom of the mixer, and then they are not going to mix correctly. But then, once that all the dry ingredients are in the mixer, it's important to have a dry cycle. And this will depend on the type of the mixer, but I'm just giving you an example here of 2 minutes. And then you mix all those dry ingredients for 2 minutes, and then you start applying your liquids. And once that all the liquids are in the mixer, then you provide a wet cycle. So in the dry cycle, you are allowing all the dry ingredients to mix correctly. In the wet cycle, you are allowing your liquid ingredients to mix correctly. And these cycles are gonna depend are gonna be based on the mixer type that you have. But then comes the next step. You wanna evaluate how you are mixing your ingredients. And what we do commercially, but you can also do it for your home base feeds. You can evaluate the coefficient of variation. And basically, what you do basically is that you need to collect 10 samples. Let's say after you mix all these ingredients, you just collect 10 samples from different places of the mixer, and you evaluate the uniformity of the mix. A very easy way to evaluate the mixer uniformity is to buy, the only thing that you need to really buy are like these strips that measure the level of chlorides. They are called Quantap strips. One of these containers is gonna have 40 strips, and you only need 10 strips to evaluate the uniformity of the mix. Then other materials that you need is hot water, a small scale, filters, some cups, and then spoons. And then once that you collect the 10 samples, you just need to label sample 1 to 10. From each sample, you collect 10 grams from each sample, and then you add 90 grams of hot water. And we basically use hot water because the hot water helps to solubilize the salt and extract the chloride from the sample. Then after you add the 90 grams of hot water, then you stir the solution for 60 seconds. And imagine that basically you just need to think that you are when you are moving, like the sugar with the coffee. So you are just stirring just to extract the salt, and then you just place the paper filter. And when you place the paper filter, you're gonna see that the solutions start penetrating the paper filter, and then you just place a Quantap strip in the solution. And the Quantap strip is going to tell you how much chloride is in that sample. So basically, in this point, what you are evaluating is how much chloride is in each sample. And basically, you place, the strip here. And what you're going to see is that as you place this yellow column, that is start going up. And basically, what this is doing is measuring the level of chloride. Once that the strip finish reading, you are gonna see that this part on the top is gonna become completely black, that you are gonna see in a minute. So right now it's still measuring the level of chloride, and you can see now that a black line is forming at the end. Once that this line is completely dark, then you know that the strip finished measuring the level of chloride. This reaction is going to take around 5 minutes, but because you are running the 10 samples at the same time, the whole procedure might take you less than 30 minutes. Then what you look is like, okay, this is, let's say this is 5.2. So then you just look at 5.2 and then you compare to the bottle, and then you know like the level of chloride is 250. But the other thing, and it's not going to affect, you know, like the result, but what you need to remember here is that this is a dilution of 10. So you multiply that by 10, and that will give you 2,500. So once that you have the results of each sample, then you just put those results in an Excel spreadsheet, as you can see here, and then you have sample 1 to 10. In this case, you are evaluating the level of salt, because you can also evaluate the level of salt here. You can either evaluate chloride or salt. But then basically what you do is, like in the Excel spreadsheet, you calculate the mean, then the standard deviation, and then the coefficient of variation. The coefficient of variation is basically the standard deviation divided by the mean times 100. And what you want is to have like a coefficient of variation less than 10%. If you have a less than 10%, then you know like all the nutrients have been distributed correctly in the feed. These are some corrective actions. For example, if your coefficient of variation is higher than 10, then you can fix the problem by increasing the mixing time. So let's say if you were doing 2 minutes, then you just multiply 2 minutes times, or let's say, and I'm gonna do it here, let's say you do 120 seconds times 1.25, 120. And then you know like you need to increase it to 150 seconds, the dry cycle. And you do the same with the wet cycle. And just by increasing the mixing time, you should be able to improve the CV. The other thing that you need to remember is that if you are doing the same procedure all the time, you only need to do this test once a year. So basically with one of the bottles, you can do 4 different tests. Another thing that I forgot to mention is like, let's say if you decide to use the Quantap strip, you need to, what's in the bottle, let me see if I can, no, I cannot see it in the bottle, but in the bottle, when you look the Quantap strips, they are gonna have a description that say low range or high range. You need to get the low range, because these samples don't contain a lot of salt and chloride. If you are using, you know, if you will be producing mineral premixes, then you are gonna get you are gonna buy the high range. But the only thing that you need to remember is that you need a low range, and that will be the description in the bottle. Well, I have it here. See, low range. This is what you need. This high range will be more for like for minerals. And these are some of the prices. These prices change all the time. But when I buy like these strips, typically I buy them in Amazon. But then once that you make all that feed, you need to pay attention to feed storage. And what you want is just maintain the feed as fresh as possible. If you are mixing your own feeds, my advice will be just to mix maybe for like a week of what you need. If you are buying commercial, then you don't want to store that for more than 3 months. And also it's important to store the feed in containers similar to these ones, And then just you don't want to leave like empty bags laying around because then you can have issues with rodents, insects, wild birds, etc. And also we need to consider too that like right now we are facing a big challenge with the avian influenza too, and we don't want any wild birds, getting close or in contact with our flocks. And a good way to prevent those wild birds is to make sure that we don't have any spilled feed and make sure that the feed is in a sealed container. And when we look the feeders, we need to make sure that we have adequate feeder space. And also we need to pay attention to the height too. We don't want to raise the feeders too much because that's going to limit the intake of the birds, but we cannot lower it too much too, or have it we don't want to have it like at the floor level because that can lead to spillage. So the take-home message is like it's important that you are familiar with the nutrients and the feed labels. It's important to understand the needs of the birds, and we need to remember that like if we are producing broilers, the because broilers are more for a meat accretion, the broiler diets they are going to contain more protein and more energy. But if we are feeding layers, then layers because they are going to be laying an egg, not every day, but um, fairly often, then we need to pay attention to calcium in the layer feeds. We don't want to give a diet with high calcium to the broiler because that can also creates challenges to the broilers. So it's very important to understand that like different birds have different nutritional needs. And proper nutrition is key for optimal production. We need to make sure that we are mixing the feeds correctly. And if you are mixing your own feeds, remember that that's all what the birds need. We need to be very careful with providing too many kitchen scraps because if we just provide too many for the birds, that's not going to be a complete feed, and then they are not going to be willing or they are not going to be hungry to consume the complete feed. And also, we need to remember that we need to have fun. So thank you very much. You have my contact information here. I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And if for any reason you have a question later, just send me an email and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Well done. We got 3 questions. Make
Okay.
that 4. Is it a good idea to add apple cider vinegar when on a well in order to reduce the pH level?
I think that would be like a good that could be a good strategy, Jackie, because like even in commercial feeds we can use acidifiers just to acidify the water. We have even used like because apple cider I think will be more like acetic acid. We have used acetic acid in the past, and that lowered the pH to around 4.6. But that will depend on the concentration of the acid and also the pH of the initial water. There are other stronger acids like citric acid that will lower the pH of the water to 3.5. So yeah, that could be like a good strategy because we need to remember that if we have a low pH between the gizzard and the proventriculus of the birds, that helps with the digestion of phosphorus. It helps with if we have like any enzymes in the feed, the activity of the enzyme to break down that phosphorus, the absorption of calcium. So yeah, it could be a good alternative.
Second question is, do chickens need a certain ratio of saturated to unsaturated fats?
If you look the requirements of the birds, they only have like the only free fatty acid that they are required is linoleic acid. What happened is that depending on the level of saturation, some fats are gonna have higher metabolizable energy than others. So speaking nutritionally, the fats they are gonna have between 8,600 to 9,000 kcals per kilogram. So if you have like, let's say a high quality soybean oil, it will be like closer to 9,000 kcals per kilogram. If you have another oil that could be saturated or lower quality, the energy level of that oil is gonna be lower. But in chickens, we don't really have like a specific requirements between saturated and unsaturated. Pigs, if you are, let's say, growing pigs, for example, um, towards the end in the finisher phase, you need to lower the unsaturated. And the reason is because that will affect the bacon quality. That's why, like we limit the amount of DDGS in the finishing phase because the DDGS are going to have corn oil and then it's in saturated fat, is going to affect the quality of the meat. But no, in broilers, I have never heard of a specific rule with saturated versus unsaturated.
Okay, this question came in when you were talking about the synthetic amino acids. What is the downside of using more soybean meal? Is it cost, efficiency of protein use?
Well, the only thing that we need to consider when we have a soybean meal is that we are using soybean meal as a protein source too. But the carbohydrates in soybean meal, stachyose, raffinose, those carbohydrates, the birds don't really have the enzymes to break down those carbohydrates. That's why when you look the gross energy of soybean meal is over 4,000 kcals, but when you look the metabolizable energy for birds is only 2,400. So they basically just get like around 60 to 65% of the energy. So the only consideration that we need to take is like don't have a lot of those non-starch polysaccharides in the diets, particularly during the starter phase. But as the birds get older, then they can they are not as affected as the small birds by those non-starch polysaccharides. But in reality, we don't typically, when we formulate the diets, we don't typically put a restriction for soybean meal. What some companies do is that they use exogenous enzyme to help the bird to break down more those carbohydrates.
The other thing is if you put excess protein just to get methionine, all the other amino acids are excreted and you're
Yeah.
getting nitrogen pollution.
Nitrogen pollution, and also the birds need extra energy to excrete that extra, and then it's going to affect the efficiency of the flock too.
Are there any recommended resources for nutritionally complete home mixed recipes?
Could you repeat the question, Jackie?
Are there any recommended resources for nutritionally complete home mixed recipes?
The resource that I feel like could be used in the US is Dr. Jean Pesty from the University of Georgia. They have like like a Excel spreadsheet. It's called WUFDA. I don't know if you have heard about that tool.
I
And
think
then,
so.
and basically what you do is like if you there are like book values for the different ingredients for like corn, soybean meal, wheat, and then basically you just plot how much energy you want, how much protein and how much calcium, and then the program calculates how much soybean meal you need, how much corn, etc., etc. So that will be a good resource that is available, that is like an Excel spreadsheet that you just basically need to get familiar with the program, and that could be a good source in my opinion.
Yeah. Problem is that, different kinds of poultry require different things, and you don't, it's hard to have for whatever resources everybody has,
Yeah.
because your diets are based on your resources.
Yeah, and different ingredients. And not all ingredients have like Well, they are going to have book values, but the variability, the nutritional variability could be high. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can grated cassava flakes be used in place of maize as the main source of carbohydrate?
Cassava is
We have
used,
two people from Africa here.
yeah. Cassava is used a lot in Africa as energy source. And I think there are some anti-nutritional factors in cassava that we need to be aware. I don't remember what is the anti-nutritional factor.
Yeah,
But
I think they have cyanide in it or
yeah,
H
yeah.
but there are varieties that are low in it or
But
have
yeah,
none at all. So
yeah, cassava is a good source that can be used in I have seen it that it is used in Africa to replace corn. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Anybody have any other questions? We're a little over time. Seeing none, let me turn off my recording here. Stop recording.